I think I'm doing this one.
Yes.
Once on Aranea. So yeah, once on Aranea. Before I even express my opinion, I'll do a quick synopsis up to the pivot. Is a story of astronauts going and checking out asteroids and planets, which I think almost every one of these are. But we learn about a tradition amongst these astronauts that when they visit planets and asteroids, they have a process where when they leave one of their astronauts on these areas for a while to see if they're habitable, because sometimes dangers will not attack groups. So they put this one person on the planet or asteroid to see if the danger will come out when it's only one person. So he goes through a ton of different people and how they've dealt with being alone on their planets, and then it becomes this guy's turn, and I can't remember his name, I'm sorry, but he's left alone on this planet or this asteroid, and this asteroid is home to a bunch of, the way they describe it, I think, is maternal loving spiders. So there's spiders everywhere, and they're always chittering and they're always making noises, but they're very maternal and loving. So he's very happy that he's left on this asteroid planet, or this asteroid where the spiders are very maternal, and he's left with a dog. And if you watch my channel at all, that I love sci-fi with dogs in it. It was like a theme for a while where all the sci-fi I read had dogs in it. But yes, he's left with his dog. It's a man and his best friend, and he's listening to the spiders chittering, and he starts making up a song, and it has many verses about how he is to be the guy on the spider asteroid, and then the turn happens. And we're going to have to spoil it. So if you want me to, we can continue from here, and I'll spoil the rest of the story. But yeah, if you don't want to hear this next part, fast forward through the video. Do you guys want me to just spoil it now and then talk about it?
Well, is there anything to say before the spoiler part? The only thing I'm thinking of is just, I think that premise is hilarious, that they leave one person because they're, whatever malevolent is there is more likely to attack just one than a group. I'm like, who is this poor sod that has to stay
Right.
and like draw straws? And like, he seems happy enough about it to stay there. I'm like, who volunteers for that?
And the list beforehand is like, this guy disappeared. We don't know where he went. There was literally nothing left of his body. And he goes through this list of all these people that have been destroyed by being left alone on these planets. And this guy's like, I got a good one.
That's actually a good example of where people say that Lafferty is surreal and absurd or absurdist. And there's flavors of that, but I never feel like he's firmly any of those things. I don't think that captures what he does. However, he has those moments. And this one feels like a bit of a, like, there's no real justification for this. This is like a comic strip or something. It's just like, this is just being silly. We don't care. Yeah, it makes no sense that anybody would volunteer to do that. But isn't it funny and cool? Here we go. Like, just a bit absurd, I think, maybe.
Yeah. It's literally the red shirts of the Lafferty universe. These guys, and I just wanted to mention, because we're breaking into these 3 planets that are coming up here in that world Abounding story, these 3 planets that we're going to be talking about that have specific alien presences are called habitable but uninhabitable.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that should be the name of a collection of his stories.
Yes.
Hey, this looks great. What an amazing planet. Wait a second.
I love that. I was going to bring that up as well. In fact, what it says is that they're habitable but uninhabited.
Okay.
Like, so they're like, and it says each for its own unclear reason. But it's like, this stuff is eminently habitable, but nobody's living there.
Yeah.
And that is like a theme and to like almost all these stories.
Awesome. So this was the most terrifying of all these stories. So you brought up Lovecraft, Virgil. This is some cosmic horror, body horror. This fits into so many of these categories. The spiders have a ritual where the young become adult spiders. And the ritual is that they are covered in a cocoon by the rest of the spiders. And I can't believe, I think they said it was another spider. They putrefy another dead spider and stick it in the hood of the cocoon so that the baby spiders will change and start to eat this putrefied other spider and grow into an adult spider.
Can I just pop in there and say,
yes, please.
What it is that they discover there's these two species, or they seem like two species. They're actually two different forms of the same species, and they call them, I think, fingerlings or something. But they're these these tiny little bipeds that walk around that the spiders then put in that cocoon to feed the baby spider or whatever for it to transform into an adult or something along the. No, sorry. There's three different ones. There's the fingerlings, and then there's quadrupeds, and they put quadrupeds in the cocoon, putrefied.
So they're
the fingerling, and the fingerling.
They're a different species. Yeah, a different species. Yeah. So they decide that this guy with his dog is obviously an unformed spider god. And they have this legend. I'm sure he hints at this concept that there's a legend of a great spider god being born. So they wrap him in a cocoon, kill and putrefy his dog, put the dog on his head. It is effed up, you guys. It was so hard to read. And basically he goes insane. And I love the way that Lafferty describes it, is he goes insane and then comes out the other end. So like he's past the plane of insanity to another plane, whatever's past insanity. And then he eats this dog and grows more legs and becomes a spider, which I thought was going to be the end of this. But no, they take him to Earth, at which point he rallies all the spiders on Earth. I think more spiders come from this asteroid, and they take over Earth. It ends with him, with every human being being paralyzed and put into these cocoons. Like this was cosmic horror times 10. It was insane. And I think it's the first one we've talked about that really describes how intense, how these loops, or not these loops, these pivot points can be in these Lafferty stories, because you're like, yeah, oh my God. And this one was like that times 1,000. It really was. It scared the heck out of me.
That's such a good description of reading certain Lafferty stories. Hey, oh my God. You guys want to come in on this at all?
You know, the animal kingdom, the alienness of it, the animal kingdom is a brutal place, and these aliens were just acting as they would.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's not very often that I read something where I actually experience a sense of dread from an impending event that I know is going to happen, and then they're like, "Oh, here's the dog being pushed into the thing." You're like, "Oh no." I'm like, no, I really don't want it. I don't want this to happen. I'm just, I don't know. I was in there, part of it as a reader, I guess I was in that cocoon and thinking, there's no way. I mean, what do you do? Like, all you can do is go past insanity. And, it's like, you have to accept it. I don't know. It was so crazy. It was such an intense, it was definitely the most intense of the stories. That scene was just shocking. Almost, splatterpunk, almost like splatterpunk stuff in that sense. Yeah, I liked it. I liked that, and I liked it also that it's such a benign thing they're trying to do. They're not attacking him. They're not like, you're the enemy. They're like, oh, it's like Dune. They're like, oh, you're the Messiah. We're gonna
lucky you.
Yeah, it's like, well, wait a minute. I don't know if I want this.
I like that they literally act like, oh, he came here for this. Like he literally brought his four-legged friend to do this. He obviously realizes he's underdeveloped and needs our help. And that was the real cincher of it, was that nobody's evil here. Like you said, Richard, this is just a cultural interpretation problem. Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, I'm pleased you guys had that reaction, because I did kind of drop it in there, like, like, oh, they don't know what's coming, which is how you counter that story. But I will say that one thing that always sticks out to me is when he starts, they sing him into like a trance, and then they start to cover him in webs. It's a really beautiful scene. The way he talks about the gossamers flying over him, and he gets all like engineering about it. He starts using engineering terms to talk about the way their webs are moving and stuff. And it's a really cool scene in that way. And then
snowflakes with beards.
It feels like it's Gulliver's Travel, and all of a sudden he's pinned there. Oh no, I'm pinned. What am I going to do? And then it just goes darker.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you're heading here, but that prose. That description of the gossamer coming over them, described as the lightest, most beautiful snow you've ever felt, and the snowflakes with beards, is also the final thought of the story.
Yes.
And that's incredible. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. And when the gross out dog part comes, that's definitely for me when I was just like, oh, and then it describes him when he's going insane and stuff. Like he's getting really hungry or thirsty or both in there, and he's trying to resist, like sucking in. He's literally immersed in this liquefied, disgusting dog, his friend, and he's just like, "Oh, I'm not gonna do it." And he's just like, "Forget it."
You guys remember did you see the movie, the recent I Am Legend movie with Will Smith?
Long time ago, yeah.
So his dog dies in that, and everybody was talking about on the internet when that was around that you can kill a person in a movie and it doesn't matter, but you kill a dog. Yeah. This would be a harrowing movie or episode of Lafferty TV to watch right here. This with the body horror and all of that.
Yeah, we probably should have given a content warning. Animal harm.
Seriously, yeah.
Some people really don't want to read stuff that
we'll have to put it in the description. Yeah,
yeah, but yeah, and the ending is actually happens about as quick as Chris described it. So it's not like this big played out. They come back and they take over the world. It's really clipped and some of even what Chris said there is really implied. Like this is what's about to happen, but it does end literally with like, here comes that sense of snow, bearded snow, and the webs are just starting to cover the earth.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Epic.
All right. Does anybody want to say anything else about that one before we move on?
It's a good case for leaving your dog at home.
I've got my dog laying here next to me. It's okay, buddy. I won't eat you.
Don't take it.
Right. So World Abounding, I think, is next, and that's over to you again, Chris.
All right. Yeah, this was as you said in some of your emails, the longest Lafferty that we read, and this one really was strangely profound for me, and I'm going to have to try to pin that down. But let me give a quick synopsis. There is a world called World Abounding, and this is one of the uninhabited or habitable but uninhabited planets that Richard brought up. This is a planet that everybody that's gone there has described it as just perfect and wonderful and just incredible all the way around, and everything in abundance is what they keep saying about it. This planet has everything in abundance, and it's about these people that go and land on this planet, and they're looking through the logs of the old of people that have been there before them. And there's a guy. Does anybody remember his name? He's also really big in Thieving Bear planet. This early explorer, the
John Chancel.
Chancel, yes.
He comes up in more stories as well.
Yeah, John Chancel is like this kind of hero early astronaut that explored all these places first, and he built a memorial on this planet or something, like a structure. I don't know exactly what he built it for, a tower. But when they land there, there's terraces next to this volcano, and it seems like all the places have been covered by this ash, and they show up, and they are overtaken with this feeling of joy and love. It's 3 couples and 1 engineer, 7 people, and they land, and the planet fills them with happiness and contentness, so much so that they all kind of split up into what I can only describe of a night of ecstasy. They all make love on this planet because it's so wonderful, except for the engineer. And then, let me see if I'm getting this in the right order. Suddenly there's an 8th person with them, and the planet has created, and I forgot what they called her, but there's a suddenly an 8th person with them. And if I didn't understand this correct, you can jump in. And then they have children, like they get pregnant. They have children right away, but the engineer is obsessed with digging into these terraces to find this original tower that the other astronaut had made. And they dig down and they find a table of people sitting around, and they were all like Pompeii covered in ash, right? It's their last moment alive, is them sitting around and having, it looks like, dinner at this table, and they look familiar to them, and they realize that they're somehow connected to the people that were of the mission right before theirs. I think there's been 11 missions, and they're like, well, this is really strange. They look similar to those, but those people came back from World Abounding. They weren't stuck there. They came back. So they dig down. They have these children that grow up super fast. They dig again another layer down, and they realize, oh, this area has been dug out before. So the 11th mission came and dug and saw the 10th mission, and they go down and down, and there's layers of all the missions of these people sitting at tables that have accepted being covered in volcanic ash and are eating dinner when they do so. And these children age, and I guess that's kind of the pivot point there.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and say I have a slightly different interpretation of the first part, and I'm just going to say it, and then we'll leave it to people to go read the story themselves and see what they think. The way I understood it was, if there's an 8th person involved, and I can't remember if that's more toward the beginning or later, there's definitely a moment when it basically says that the planet itself, and or the volcano, and if it's the volcano is almost like the figure of the planet itself, is basically involved in their lovemaking. Like as
a third person.
Like it's literally like a threesome with each couple and the planet. And that presumably is how the next strange aspect comes. But when there's an extra person that gets involved with the engineer, it's actually one of their children having grown
is it?
Up. Yeah, so let's...
Oh, okay.
Can we say spoilers from this point?
Yes.
This is one I do not believe is that spoilery, because I was shocked by this, but not in a sort of like, I don't know how to explain it. It just didn't feel like just doesn't feel like a spoiler type thing to me. But if you want to skip ahead, do so now. What happens, I believe, is that they make love and the women are immediately pregnant, like the next day. Yeah. And they give birth within a few days, and then their children grow within either weeks or months to adults. And one of the couple's children becomes the partner or whatever to the engineer guy, I think, if I remember right.
That's
but regardless, then this all leads up to a final moment, which is the explosion of the volcano. And it's their children that were born and grew really fast that are going to sit there at a table eating while the volcano. And that's obviously what happened with all the rest. And it describes that last moment as the volcano personified. And it's almost like sexually graphic.
Oh, yeah.
But it says that when he explodes that way, he comes down to the river that it keeps talking about as well, and has his way with the river. So there's like all this like sexual personification of nature on this planet that like symbiotically brings the humans into its life cycle, just to produce some human kids that it likes to turn into statues, and every time the people just go away going like, well, we can't live here, I guess, or something along those lines.
Yeah. I think I confused it with Thieving Bear, actually, which we'll get into with Thieving Bear. It's interesting to me because the children are obviously communicating with the dead of the earlier missions, and their fathers and mothers are like, you can't be communicating with them, and they say that's funny because they say the same thing about you, that we can't be communicating with you because you weren't even born on World Abounding. And there's a point where they're in World Abounding clothes. And then the guy's like, how would we even know if these were World Abounding clothes? The dead people at the table. And he says, how would we even know if these were World Abounding clothes? Because we don't know of any people here, but they just know that they are. And then 2 of the children are married 22 days after their birth. And what is it? They say, who married you? And is it the volcano or a dog? I can't, it wasn't a human marriage. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, a world that's too good is I think kind of the end that I took for it, because when the people choose to die, the way that they decide to do that is that they've experienced enough. Right? They say, okay, we've experienced enough. And when this other guy tries to die with them, the guy that came with the engineer that came on the ship with them, he's trying to die with them, and they're like, you can't die here, you haven't experienced near enough, you got to go. And I like this concept that the children are fulfilled and they can't imagine living years or over a year at all, because they've experienced everything that makes them everything that they can. So they're done and they're happy about it.
I have some things to say about that, but did anybody else get to read it that wants to come in at this point?
I was just thinking about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the background information that I know about Lafferty is that I read that he went to mass every day, that he lived with his sister and was never married, and had a problem with alcohol. And this story seemed out of left field to me based on that knowledge. I thought, wow, this is a very interesting story from what looks like a very conservative type of person.
Yeah. Well, as you read through, it's going to come up again and again. He was actually, it's really hard to explain what Lafferty's all about with this kind of stuff, but it does come from his theology. I will say that his sort of Thomistic, Aristotelian Thomistic, Thomas Aquinas and Augustine and some other Catholic theology things about this. It's called sacramental theology, and at a philosophical level, it's called sacramental ontology, and it's where all existing things exist by participation within divine existence. Okay, and the downstream thing that means, especially in a writer like Lafferty, this comes up in like another Catholic writer like Flannery O'Connor, is that like everything is participating in God. So all the stuff, our technology, our waste, like our piss and our excrement and all the sex, all of that, like it's bodily fluids and just everything is participating in the divine. Now, however weird that sounds or whatever else, that has a lot of implications. You know what I mean? So here's this guy that goes to mass every day, but it's through observing that mass and what it means for him in that theological tradition that he would write a story like this, in that, like, there's nothing off limits. Lafferty wasn't the kind of guy that would say things like shit and fuck, but he's certainly going to talk about them. Like his terms for shit and stuff were like hokey and like crap, but not crap, but terms like that. Once you start noticing it, he talks about it in so many stories. It's usually animal feces, but he's constantly talking, and he talks about it in this exuberant way, like this is part of things, this is part of life, the dung beetles use it and whatever, and so there's a lot of like sex or implied sex as well, and sometimes he's being a little censorious about it, but not because it's sex, it's because he thinks it's being done in some wrong way or something, I don't know. But regardless, like that earthiness and that bodily life is really important to him, and it's like just all over his fiction, and it's why his fiction is so ribald and often grotesque and often just like funny about bodily life and whatever, and the life cycles and the brutality of the life cycles, even that, like that we talked about, the spiders and whatever, that all participates in the divine for Lafferty, so I'm just trying to give an idea of like why a Catholic theological Catholic person, because he was the kind of guy that like would read theology and understand some of that hardcore stuff, like philosophical level stuff, would write these kinds of stories. It's still a little odd. It feels like he's taking that idea to an extreme maybe sometimes, but it's not. There is a through line there. There is a connection there. It's not like just out of nowhere or like a sheer contradiction or something, as far as I understand it. What do you guys want to come back on that?
Well, I just wanted to say the title of the story reminded me of a phrase in the Bible about giving life abundantly, and the abounding world abounding. And they lived their lives so fast and so abundant. It kind of tied into, I'm trying to see where Lafferty is really going with this based on what I know about his life experience.
Yeah. And he, by the way, he also, among his like many repeated themes, sped up time. He uses it a million times and almost always in some awesome way. And his most famous story regarding that is Slow Tuesday Night, which everybody says is like predicted internet speed of like news cycles and things. But people like make and lose entire like huge mega corporate fortunes in like one evening, type of thing in this story. And there, I think he's more critiquing, again, sort of capitalism and stuff in that story, but he can kind of go different ways and do different things with sped up time. And I'm not totally sure meaning wise what's happening in this story. Like, I like Chris's take and I think it's on to something. I don't know for sure if that's, if there's more going on as well or what, but yeah, it's a good example too of one of the things where we're struggling with it, because it's like, is a little bit longer and there's just a lot to keep in mind. You're like, well, what happened in this story again? So yeah, and that makes it rich, I think, but yeah.
So one thing that I always look for in stories is central image. The concept that a well-told story will have an image that sticks with you. And this one, I don't think I'll ever forget this concept of them digging down and revealing layer upon layer, generation upon generation of people that have basically chosen to sacrifice themselves to this volcano because they'd lived long enough. And one of the things that I've noticed in all these, well, not all of it, in many of these stories, of these planet exploring stories, is that they have to figure out how to write their reports. Like a lot of these end with them, like, how are we going to write this report? And this one does. And they're like, we're going to say the same thing that everybody did before us. And they're like, you can't. They literally told us we're going to be failures. And they're like, too bad. Like you can't handle this planet is what they put. You can't handle it because it's too, and maybe it's just about people, about different time lines. I mean, I hate to get D&D about it, but I always think about like elves and dwarves and humans and their different lifespans and how weird that must be. Yeah, I mean, it's strange to watch your kids die 26 days after they've been born, but it's weird when your kids are like, we've lived a good life, we're ready. Yeah.
I think you're getting into, there's tiny touch points here with Wolf. I feel, with like time spans and different evolutions of humans and things in the Book of the New Sun. I don't know if you've heard that kind of chat and trying to interpret Book of the New Sun, but it gets into some things kind of like this.
I liked you talking about Catholicism because I was thinking about Wolf when you were doing that as well, because he's also a Catholic.
Right. Another like little note here is it's such in many ways to me it's a very mythic story, but Lafferty does put in nice little conventional science fiction touches that if you want to play with them and think about them, they can do some pretty good work. And I only noticed this time through that when it's talking about, it keeps coming back to like they're all making love and having a fun time, and it keeps coming back to he's over there digging down. It's a cool a nice little back and forth juxtaposition. But it's I can't remember what they're called or how they're described, but it does talk about, it seems these large machines are doing the digging down that they're running. And if you stop for a second and try to imagine this as a film, it's a really beautiful shot. It's like some of the Alien Prometheus sort of films or something. You could just picture this beautiful big planet, some mountainside and whatever, and there's like these big machine, or like the new guy, the guy that does the Dune ones and Blade Runner and all that. You know, he makes machines really epic and beautiful, you know, and like you could just picture these big things. And you guys were talking earlier about working in, I don't know, factories or whatever with the conductors or something that made really loud noises or something. But like there's this like beautiful industrial sort of like thing, these things digging down so we can find another layer of these people quality to the story if you stop and think about it for a second, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Also, one last thing about this story for me is just a little note. You're talking about how they were like, yeah, we've lived long enough. And some of the crew seem to accept it because it talks about one of the daughters as this volcanic ash or whatever is coming down over them. They're eating their food. And I believe it says that the daughter looks up and sees her mother there in the ship as it's taken off and goes like that. And the mom looks back and goes,
yeah.
I've only known you a very short time and you're now going to end your life in volcanic ash. See you later. You know? It's more of that weird absurdity that Lafferty drops in.
Yeah.
There's a hypnotic quality that these planets give people. It almost looks like it's a drug induced sometimes in some of these three planets. And so there's definitely something that the Abounding world gives them that gives them this joy and this numbness to what's going on.
Yeah. And I've been noticing this time around that I think the biggest sense of the alien that I'm finding in these stories from Lafferty is actually often through some kind of human, non-human symbiosis. That's where it comes in. Like, even if it's just, I made you make babies really fast so I could cover them in volcanic ash. You know, there's like this cooperation that's a little bit mysterious, maybe even underhanded, and so, you know, or something that keeps happening to these different explorers in different ways, you know, gruesome ways like the spiders or whatever, you know, that either transforms them or does weird things with them. And that's really quite strange. And I'm wondering, has anybody seen, I think one of you have mentioned it at least, Scavengers Reign, the cartoon show, the animated show? Yeah. It's one of my all-time favorite things currently. You say you have seen it, Virgil?
Oh yeah.
I'm starting to get a lot of vibes in his own very, you know, unique and maybe different way in Lafferty's science fiction, like exploration type stories of similar things. It's about people stranded, their ship broke and they're stranded on this new world. The flora and fauna of this world are, oh my God, you know, they're just so strange. There's a lot of monstrous qualities and predation and stuff, but also a lot of benevolent symbiosis that can happen in different things, and it's a question of whether they'll adapt or not. And in his own way, I think Lafferty is doing similar types of work in a lot of this fiction. I don't know if you guys can see any of that.
I mean, just you mentioned Scavengers Reign, and I know there's a scene in there where they're trying to get to this sort of like, I don't exactly know, it's not exactly a forest, but it's like this growth that will part, that it's impenetrable, but they're able to part it with one of the creatures or something. But one of the characters stops and she sees something, and the other character goes, and this forest, this growth like collapses around her, like hems her in, doesn't crush her or anything, but she's watching this little flower that's maybe, I don't know, the size of a basketball or something open up, and this whole like alien like life cycle happens before her eyes in like 30 seconds, and it's like this extremely moving moment, and it's like what just is like, she doesn't know what happened, and she's so stunned by it, she doesn't know what to do. She gets out, and then she sort of tells the other character, like, she doesn't even know how to talk for a minute. And there's a sense of that. It's like the interactions that Lafferty aliens seems to have with humans aren't antagonistic or benign. They're an unknown, they're like a third thing that's like it makes a triangle from those that you just can't expect, and sometimes it comes out as being harmful or good. I don't know. It's just that's what I really like about these stories that we've read. It's just very, never a predictable approach.
I think that's a beautiful little connection that you made with Scavengers Reign, and I agree with that assessment. Although, let's see it get challenged in the next two stories.
That's true.
One last thing I did forget to say about World Abounding. One of the reasons I brought it up too is it explicitly ties together the story we're about to talk about and the story we talked about previously once on Aranea as being a grouping of 3 planets that were unexplainable again as to why they were uninhabited, even though they seemed habitable. And it also lists out a whole bunch of other planets that Lafferty has recurring in a bunch of different stories, including, I can't remember if it's in this part or not, Hameroi and Astrove are mentioned in this list. And it's not the last time we're going to see something from Astrove either. So that's the kind of interconnection that he does even into his novels and stuff. You'll see these different planets come up again and stuff. So
maybe we should mention that Astrove is the planet from Past Master.
Thank you.
And right, Chris read The Education of the Cameroys. So yeah, so I was, and that's how I knew that. So we were reading these and I thought, I didn't know these stories were connected. And it was a really wonderful discovery.
Yeah. And then I would say from what I've seen so far, they're loosely connected and some are developed more than others, but even loosely connected, I have always extremely enjoyed that aspect of reading Lafferty. I don't know why it works so well, but just hearing these planets come up again and again and realizing you're in the same constellation, a galaxy or something of, could we call it Laffertian space opera? You know what I mean? I don't know.
The Lafferty verse.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. The Lafferty verse. Yeah. So anyway, okay. So let's do Snuffles.
Yay, Snuffles.
Oh my God. I think I have the unenviable task of trying to synopsize this. I've done 3 videos on it. I should be able to do this. Although that was like, gosh, maybe a year ago now. I don't know. Anyway, and I did read it again just now. So this one at least has a very clear authorial structure. It's broken into Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. So that makes it a little easier. In part 1, explorers land on a new planet. This is truly a new one. And they've been sent there because they do know something about it, that its gravity doesn't make sense. And again, guys, come in and when I'm done, just come in and add a few things if need be. I believe it is too small to have the sort of gravity it has. And I had looked this up before and figured out what gravity does at larger and smaller scales, and I've forgotten it again. I'm so sorry. I am not a big science guy. I love it, and I try to understand it more all the time, but it's just like, that's not naturally where my brain goes. But anyway, there's an anomaly here, like with so many of these planets, that they're trying to understand. So they send a crew to understand what this planet is about. And it begins with Brian Carroll and Georgina, can't think of her surname, Georgina Chantal, I think, having a conversation, and they're end up being kind of the 2 main characters, about cosmic intimidation in the sheer size and scope of the universe that seems to diminish us as human beings and make us seem insignificant, versus could there be some relief to that in just one planet that doesn't obey the rules, the cosmic physical laws, and defies logic and is just weird and is funny and it likens it to being like a clown, eventually like to being like a carnival planet and these kinds of things, that it's just a big joke. And Brian's like, I think we found that planet. It's this planet we're coming to explore. And it's called, I call it Bellota because it's a Spanish word for acorn. And I looked it up and that's how they pronounce it in Spanish. But I like the pronunciations Bellota and Bellata as well, both of which I've heard. So I don't mind how people say it, but I'm just going to say Bellota. And Bellota is that planet. So they start studying it. We get all these little details of how, I love I'm getting too into details. All these details about how weird the flora and fauna are. And they're like, oh, this is a scientist's paradise, just like studying all this taxonomy and so on. And there we're introduced to the atmosphere, and it's constantly lightning and raining, multicolored lightning, by the way, and so on. And then in the midst of all that comes Snuffles. And like it said, there was this, and there was that, and there's this, and then it goes, and there was Snuffles. And Snuffles is a giant bear-like creature, like maybe about 3 times the size of a normal bear, who is playful and clownish, but is so huge and has like these really long fangs and stuff and claws that his funniness and his friendliness is kind of intimidating and scary. But that's the first section. It just like kind of ends with introducing all that and setting all that. And they're already having like these philosophical conversations about bears and the etymology of bears and what they've meant culturally all around the world or whatever, and different things like that.
Really quick, they also bring up in this section, I think, the concept that one of the scientists have created a principle trying to explain the gravity of this planet. Is that in this first section?
Yes. It's called Phelan's Corollary. Daniel Phelan is the like cosmologist of the group. And as far as I understand in the story, it never says what this corollary is. And I don't know how much we're meant to try to guess.
If I understood it, the way they described it is that the way that he explains it, if he does, is that this planet is the only planet that is correct in physics, and every other planet is wrong. And I just like this as thinking about critical thinking, that the only way that this guy can decide to describe it is he just redefines what is right. So he's presented with this anomaly planet and says, no, this is right, and everything else is wrong, which makes literally no sense scientifically at all. But I just like that there was this kind of, it made me think that Lafferty really understood. I think Lafferty was very intelligent, and I think that he understood the concepts of critical thinking and how scientists deal with anomalies. And I just, for some odd reason, it was kind of a throwaway part of this story, but it really stuck out to me.
I think it was actually a clue. And there's another clue that I think is in the beginning of the story as well, is that all this rain and lightning, it never rained on the bear either. And I think that's another clue in this story of what is, or foreshadowing what is coming.
Yeah. And I will say about Lafferty that as far as I can tell, he was trained as an electrical engineer. So he understood that. And as far as I can tell, he had a very decent half professional, half layman's sort of grasp of the sciences, generally speaking. And that pretty clearly comes out here and there, whether it's biology or physics, or really quite a lot of other things. And he seemed to understand invention of technology, and a lot of his characters are inventors, and he could like say details about how things work and stuff. So yeah, he was of that mindset, as well as being extremely literary and philosophical, and also just having a, he's another Gene Wolfe. It's like, where do these engineers come from? They can like have that kind of imagination and that kind of literary skill,
It's funny. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go.
You were talking about him being an engineer. This is something that I think is kind of interesting, that, I heard or read a lot of things about Lafferty being sort of cranky, or people thought he was maybe cantankerous. I'm not certain if that was, I don't know to what level that was. And then I read that he was an electrical engineer. I'm like, oh, okay. I was not surprised. I mean, I hate to say that because I've worked with electrical engineers and I like them. But I was like, oh, that's very typical. That's very typical for somebody who is an electrical engineer to not get along with an electrical engineer. That's very, not that I'm not an electrical engineer, but
that's awesome.
It's very true. I mean, I had an instructor who was an electrical engineer, and he says all electrical engineers, he says they all end up divorced. He said none of them stay married. This is what he said. He was an electrical engineer. And he had all these things like they're like this and they're like this, and I was like, and that's about 80% true. The stuff that he told me, I was like, well, it does kind of happen. But it was just sort of like Lafferty didn't get married. I'm like, okay, I can sort of he sort of was an outsider thing. Okay, he was very independent in his thinking. These things are not unusual for he was just very literate, which was not unusual. Yeah. But it's that he became a writer. I don't know. I just thought it was funny and very interesting. I was not
honestly. That's potentially very insightful about Lafferty as a person. Yeah, and I was thinking about the marriage thing. I was like, he was just like, I'm just going to save the lady the trouble. I'm not getting married.
Very practical way of approaching, relationships, I suppose, right?
Okay, so at this point, we're just going to have to do the whole spoiler thing. I don't think we can go on from here without just saying. If you really want to encounter this without knowing what's coming, you gotta stop here. But if you do, go find it as soon as you can. It's on the Internet Archive, and come back and get back into this discussion. So part 2, Act 2 is where everything changes, and it says it from the start. It's like it's something like, when it happened in narrow daylight. And I always felt from the first time I read it, when it just used that phrase, when it happened, I was like, well, there's nothing you're about to tell me that happened that's anything but like sinister or disastrous or something. Clearly. And then it kind of very clearly says, benignity drained away from that planet in a moment. We were talking about whether things are benign or not, or something in between. In this case, I do think it's more complicated than just being benign or malevolent, but the feel of it is like, and you can almost imagine that feeling. I think we've all felt it in one way or another about some kind of situation or another, where the atmosphere changes and you feel it and you're like, oh shit, things are going south, and that's what happens here in this moment. And they all feel it in the air. I think it talks about the air crackling or something. And then before Snuffles had played around like he was going to charge into where he shouldn't, where they had blocked him off from the supplies and weapons dump and that kind of thing. And this time he makes a new sound that they haven't heard, which this is the first time I've thought about that moment. And we could talk about it later, but it doesn't say he roared. It says he made a new sound. And the captain guy, who it says he made a fetish of security, he was not totally caught off guard. He was surprised, but he was ready. And he has his weapon up, and he could have, if the weapon was strong enough, and if Snuffles is the kind of creature that this can happen to, he could have killed Snuffles. But he liked Snuffles, and he was sure that this huge gun he had, a shoulder shot on this bear creature, would have done the trick. And that's what he does. It doesn't do the trick. He gets killed. Several more people get killed, and there's only 2 left. We can get into the details of that later. And then he starts to chase the other, because the other 2 weren't in the little camp space. They were out in the field, and he starts to chase them across this small planet to keep them from getting back to their weapons and until they're tired out. And from there it gets weird. Like, the story's already pretty strange, and Chris had mentioned that first section in and of itself is a delightful, like, wonder tale, and as he said, Alice in Wonderland, and it's one of my favorite parts of the story, and I liked the story just for that. Then I liked it again for turning sinister and becoming violent, and then I liked it again for getting out and out, blatantly, literally trippy, because they start going through a narcotic belt of the flora that they then realize that actually the whole planet is in a narcotic season, and they just start tripping balls, and it says they're walking in a waking dream. And at this point they start to feel, it says they're hallucinating, they start to believe that Snuffles, that monstrous creature that is chasing them, is speaking into their minds. And the whole rest of the story is in part this philosophical conversation about whether that's happening, what that would mean, how could it be, even if it's not happening, there's still something happening that's making a difference. And it's I think a very cool. This is one of his more sort of maddening stories, I would say, for me. And he has quite a number of these in novels like this too, where he pushes together mutually exclusive things in an undecidable way that really actually makes my brain hurt a little bit, in a pleasant way for me. But like, I'm just kind of like, I can't understand what's happening here, because it kind of keeps going back and forth. It could be this, it could be that. And by the last paragraph, it does seem to ontologically land that this is what's happening. But even there, I think you could put some doubt in there and stuff. So, but the rest of the story is them trying to get away, and the bear or Snuffles seeming to speak into their minds, and how that ends. So does anybody want to add to that overlong, super crazy, rough synopsis?
That part, no.
Okay, go ahead, Richard.
I would just say a really short comment is I really think this is a story of theology, God, and creation, and how chaotic that is.
Yeah, it's one of his most blatantly like theological creational type stories, and it's one of his most effed up. And you're like, he's just like blatantly bringing out the idea of like God and creation and stuff in a way that I still don't understand after many reads of this story.
Well, and I like that it comes off polytheistic in the sense that, well, it comes in 2 ways. At first, you're like, okay, this guy created this bear created this planet. and they're judging him in their thoughts the entire time, and he's like offended that he's like, I didn't know little planets, I thought this was huge. And he's like, I didn't realize the gravity was off, and I didn't realize that hornets were supposed to sting you. And he's an offended god. And it talks about the concept of needing praise as a deity. But you're right, it could push towards monotheism with the concept that he says, if I created this planet, I must have created everything.
Mm-hmm.
Which I kind of interpreted that and one of the things I was wanting to say with reading all of these is, when I read science fiction, I look for that mind-blowing moment that Star Trek would often give me, which is probably why I like that a little better than Star Wars. I have a tendency towards Star Trek. And sometimes that mind-blowing moment can come from science or some kind of weird head trip like Philip K. Dick style. But I look for that, and every one of these stories left me with the feeling that like anything was possible. These made me feel like a kid reading or watching Star Trek again. They really did, and it was incredible. And the way that I took this one is that there's this concept that this bear doesn't realize it, but there's kind of gods of every world, and that this bear, that these gods create independently, and sometimes can maybe don't get the memos of how things are supposed to work. But I can also see how this could go towards the concept of him being God of everything, because he doesn't know any other things that have created planets, so he feels like he's created everything, but he only speaks specifically of his planet and the mistakes he's made. And I think, for me, I mean, first off, I do feel he's talking to them in their heads. I know that is could be debated, but they're running around the planet and realizing he might not realize his planet is round. We're going to get back to the weapons cache that he's trying to keep us from before he does. And I love the turnaround where he's like, you know how hard it is to make something a perfect ball? At the end, he's like, I know it's round. You guys are crazy. So the whole happy ending that you're hoping is coming isn't coming. But I'm going to admit I was rooting for the bear. I don't know why, but I was rooting for the bear. Like, they offended the crap out of this poor bear that was doing his best to make a world. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, that's my thought on it.
Before we throw it to everybody else, let me just jump in and say that I've swept past all the details of this story, and some of, in its arc, the way we're talking about it, and in its philosophical questions, that's some of the juice and the best aspect of the story. But also, its details are awesome. Like, all the little things it says that it's just brief, just little glimpses of what the flora and fauna do, and the lightning and stuff is just so cool. And also the little conversations they have with etymology and different stuff and other things like that, including even a lot of the pacing and the suspense quality and the action adventure sort of quality of parts of it is all gold. It's just like a really nice story in detail. So I just want to point that out as we're like jumping into all its themes and stuff. But go ahead, guys. What do you want to say about this?
I think I just want to make sure. I believe in the beginning of the story, wasn't there a lot of discussion about everything was backwards? Like, I don't know, like the hornets didn't, like, this thing it was pleasant to get stung, but then, like, you know, I don't know, like a fly would bite you and it would be extremely, it was something like everything was flipped. Everything was like, everything was had been polarized the other way. And I thought that was really interesting. Just like and then I think they even say this, like, you know, we talked about how it's a unique world and it's the only one like it. Like, it probably, like, statistically, this world should exist, and it does, or something like that. You know? Like, okay, we found it. I just love that everything's backwards, and that the bear takes offense to.
I want to point out one little thing that I talked about at length in my videos on it, but that he does here. I think he does it like 2 or 3 times, where he does like a backwards thing and then a weirder thing and then a weirder thing. So where he'll like say, you know, you eat the outside of fruits and nuts and the inside is inedible, you know, so a reverse, you know. And then he's like, but there were like proto butterflies that stung you, I think. Which is, that's like, right. Whoa, what even is a proto butterfly? And, you know, that's not something we think of as stinging. So it's kind of a reverse, but kind of just like getting weirder. And then he said that lizards secreted honey-like manna. That's not a reversal. That's just a left turn. Like, what is that? You know, like, and he does that several times with different things in the story. And I just love that. And almost the very structure of the story itself does that. You know, it's like, oh, here's a weird topsy-turvy different planet. Oh, it's sinister. It's scary. Here's a monster. Oh, wait a minute. This is like this like trippy meditation on demiurges creating planets, and you know they're not sure if he's talking in there. You know what I mean? Like, so I love that structure in this story. Go ahead. So jump in.
Yeah, just it's like Snuffles himself. It's like the world is in his own image. He's sort of a weird flip, and he made a world that's everything's kind of a flip. And not, I mean, like you said, not exactly, but you wouldn't think of lizards secreting anything that you'd want to eat. You know, this is kind of a flip, right? But it's like, this is so weird. And I didn't really think about it as you were talking about it. But yes, Snuffles himself this world is in his image. You know, a giant bear in a little world seems weird. I don't know. So
I've never thought of that this world is in his image. That's great.
That actually brings me to what I was going to say is at first I was going, oh, this is Murphy's Law world. Everything that could go wrong goes wrong on this world, or it goes backwards. And then I go, this is probably the most powerful being that Lafferty has ever written. And his name's Snuffles. That's Lafferty, isn't it?
Yeah. Big time. You know, I knew when I got 900 Grandmothers pretty late in the game. I had collected other collections and gotten individual stories. So I finally got hold of this. And I'd read some of the stories already, but I'd never read, or I don't even think heard of Snuffles. And I looked in the table of contents and I saw that title and I went, there's no way I will not love this story. I just knew it. I just knew it in my heart of hearts. It was like this little revelation. And when it fulfilled my expectations in ways completely unexpected and yet almost expected, like the fact that there would be like almost like a monstrous, powerful being called Snuffles is almost what I anticipated in my heart of hearts. But the fact that it like fulfilled that was just like magical. Like I don't know how many authors do this, but Lafferty's one of them for me. He creates certain kinds of special moments that seem to go beyond normal reading or maybe even artistic experience, where you just feel a little spooky or just I don't know. It's just a little beyond for me. Maybe that's not true for other people. That's how some of this stuff hits me.
It is a unique thing, and it's great that you're able to find that story at a time when you could recognize from the title what to expect. It's like, that's all the information I needed to know.
Yeah. There was something Chris said that I wanted to bounce off of. Okay, I'll say another thing about Catholic theology here, I think, that I meant to actually say with world abounding. In the same way that like sacramental ontology means you include all physical things in, you know, when you think of what is the divine or what participates in the divine. Well, out of that principle also comes the longstanding Catholic tradition, which is, you know, a mixed bag. Let's be honest, you know, but this is a tendency within Catholicism has been to, you know, there's definitely been oppression and, you know, subjugation and things like that. But there's been this tendency to absorb other religions into its like worship and liturgy and what have you. And so like gods and goddesses and different things become, you know, like Mary and the saints and different stuff like that. And a lot of Catholics all over the world from, you know, sort of time immemorial, so to speak, or since the beginning called Catholicism to now, will still practice local religious things and magic and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's just accepted as part of this whole weird, wonderful thing called Catholicism. And like I said, and there are like indigenous people and different peoples that will own that, but like critically. And there are those who will resist that. And there's like a big complicated thing there. Okay. But my point being here that's another reason why you see a lot of so-called, you know, pagan type stuff in Lafferty, whether it's I felt that world. I don't think we really got into that, but I felt World Abounding was kind of a pagan type story with the personified volcano and sex between nature things and what have you. And then here, maybe this is what I wanted to bounce off with Chris. Here you have this god, of this one world that thinks he's like the god. Although, well, the real thing that he's working with here, I think, is Gnosticism. And there's like a demiurge, and then there's like a creator, and then there's like a greater god beyond the creator, and that kind of stuff, which again is not, it's like a certain twist on Christianity, but it's not exactly Christian. And again, like that Catholic imagination just tends to go, yeah, let's use that too, like, and we'll try to really work it into our theology in really cool philosophical ways, but also to the degree that we can't, who cares, man? Let's just bring it in. It's cool, And again, I know there's problematics with that, but I'm just trying to give an understanding of why Lafferty's staunchly Catholic imagination keeps bringing in all this kind of stuff, if that makes any sense. And again, let me just say one last qualification on that. I grew up Protestant. I've never been Catholic. I've been very interested in Catholicism. I have a lot of respect for it, to be honest, whilst having a deep, deep criticism of it and almost a fear of it in some ways, as I do with most Christian religion, having been a devout believer myself in the past. But I am not an expert. I've thought a lot about Catholicism. I have read some Catholic theology, but I'm far from an expert. So take all this stuff I'm saying about, Catholic theology believes this, take it with a huge grain of salt. Go consult real theologians and stuff. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the way that he introduces the concept of bears creating the universe is by talking about that in many cultures there are myths that harken back to that. So I think he absolutely is talking about that. I wanted to, if you guys don't mind, does anybody else have anything to say about that?
I was just going to say, for you guys who are into mythology, creation myths are huge, right? Every culture seems to have one, and this just seems to be one of Lafferty's tying into a story about creation.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote down a couple of quotes, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah.
This story was really, I really enjoyed this. So I don't remember if this is a quote or if this is a thought. Snuffles is a mirror. We can't understand why we're serious until we know why he is funny. I think that's a direct quote from this story. Yes, and to me, that, and of course it has to do with mirrors. So Virgil's going to laugh at me because all I talk about is mirrors constantly. I love the concept of mirrors, apparently. But I like this. I think it was Carol that says this. He says, we have to figure out why he's funny in order to understand why we're serious. And it's the early philosophical question that this story was wrestling with, in my opinion, is, and that Alice in Wonderland is wrestling with, is this concept of we can only have the concept of the silliness of society with the existence of society itself. And I think Snuffles, in a way, is a complete crushing of that idea, because he brings up that philosophical question. We have to understand why Snuffles is humorous, and then Snuffles isn't humorous anymore. Like, all of a sudden we find that Snuffles becomes this insane killing bear, something very serious. And the concept of, I think this story looks a little bit about the concept of society and the concept of this kind of, I mean, even if you want to think about pagan and that kind of stuff, the concept of this survival versus society, and it's all funny and enjoyable until it becomes about society. I don't know, that is a completely unbirthed thought, but that was kind of where I was going before the switch happened and right after the switch.
And that's Alice in Wonderland, and then it's Through the Looking Glass. And maybe this novel is making that change. When you said that mirror part, I thought, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's a good connection.
Everything gets reversed. Yeah.
I unfortunately still have never read Alice in Wonderland, so I'm curious to chase that aspect of things up. I'm struggling to understand, Chris, your idea about society in this story. I've never thought of it in terms of society. And I don't think you're wrong. To be fair, I'm not a massive social thinker, so I don't readily go there. But there are explicit aspects of the story that seem to be about that, in the sense that it's big on its cast of characters. Really takes time to list them out by number, and then it says that the phrase "sociability impels," and to introduce the fact that they all sort of got along and got to know each other, or something like that, and that it is about doing science in a group setting, as is at least one part of that. But yeah, I'm still beyond that. I'm kind of like, what? I'm not sure what you mean about the silliness of society and in relation to what's going on that planet, or Snuffles or something.
Yeah, the seriousness of society.
Sorry,
the seriousness of society, and it's that quote, because he says they're talking about the planet makes them feel stuffy, like they're too serious, and he responds with, "We have to understand why Snuffles is funny to understand why we're serious."
Yeah, and
that is incredible to me, because what that I think is saying is that and again, I go back to Alice in Wonderland. I think specifically about the caucus race. For those of you guys that have read it, it's hilarious, because they're trying to dry off from being wet and they're running around, but the bird calls this a caucus race, and it tells really dry humor jokes as they're going around, like the dry humor jokes is going to dry them off. It's totally worth the read. I think you would enjoy it. But the only way that Alice in Wonderland could exist is for the Victorian era to exist. For those people to take themselves so seriously, created this complete nonsense of a tale to exist. And I think by calling this guy Carol, the fact that his last name is Carol, I think that he is, in a way, talking about how we make fun of the seriousness of society. And that's why there's a clown planet. And that's why Snuffles is a clown. And then for me, I was so invested in this concept of Alice in Wonderland and the seriousness of because they call themselves serious, the seriousness of their society, and the silliness of Snuffles, and how they are a mirror to each other. And then suddenly it's just a bear killing the shit out of people. And I was like, okay, I guess that is an answer, that you can't have society when there's survival on the line. It was just really interesting to me. And I think I'd have to read it again and think on it more to really put it to you. The thought is still new in there.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's making way more sense now, actually. Yeah. That is one of my favorite parts of the story, and some of its philosophical core is the part about the mirror stuff. It is actually Georgina or Margie who says it, which I do think is kind of significant. That says, okay. And for me, that is the statement of the story. Yeah. We can't understand how serious we are until we understand how or why Snuffles is funny. And I said that in my video. And I said, so if I could understand in this story why Snuffles is funny, then I'm supposed to understand something really profound about humans. And I haven't figured it out yet. I really don't totally get it. And I actually really like that. It's one of his most, to me, it's starting to get up there with the level of, like Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun and Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian and stuff, where there's these almost irresolvable issues that are still really productive and fruitful, because it's really hard to understand what he's getting at here. And I do think with enough time, you could come up with real strong interpretations and theories on this is where we land. This is what it means. But it would take some work, and it would probably still be debatable. But yeah, and that whole thing about the mirrors, because she says there's an old saying, know thyself, which we've all heard. And she says its variant is look within. And then she says, but our eyeballs face outward, and then she just makes this leap from there to, so looking outward is where we're going to have to find our mirrors by which we can look within. And she just goes, my mirror is most often the microscope. And then she makes the statement about Snuffles being a mirror for all of us. And I took that to mean that even in our sciences, we are seeing something about our psyches, because it is psyches that came up with the sciences, you know.
Right.
And Lafferty is very much about this interaction and rapport and breakages and all kinds of stuff between interiority and exteriority. And it's not one or the other. He's every bit as much about ecology as he is about psychology. And he's every bit as much about psychology as he is ecology. And this story is a lot about that. But he seems to be saying something about, like, you have to look out to look within. It's just the way we're built and what we've got. And here they're being given this like extraordinary outward revelation, like a theophany of this godlike creature. And what are they going to learn from that? And I still don't know what it is.
I want to hijack one more time. I am so sorry, guys. This would, I think, have ended up my deep read if I did this on the channel. I think there's one more quote that I found really important. First, it's awesome, and to me it seems like Lafferty was looking way ahead. So she ends up carrying the male astronaut halfway across this planet, and then he starts running himself again because he takes a fall, and then she says, "I would carry you again if I weren't collapsing myself." At which point he responds, "Damn it, you couldn't. You're only a girl." Which I thought was such an interesting line. I love how much that kind of looks to the future. But then she says, "I am not only a girl. Nobody is only in anything. Our trouble here may have started with your thinking that Snuffles was only an animal, and he read your thoughts and was insulted." And I like this concept of the inability to define one thing. So, and for me, the concept of the mirror and this quote came together, and I haven't fully even formed how they fit together, but I feel like these two moments of the story are the key to unlocking the riddle of this story for me.
I'm going to let other people talk, but just let me say that those are the two key moments of the story for me as well, and I hadn't even thought to try to put them together yet. And that's one of my all-time favorite phrases from Lafferty is, "Nobody is only in anything." Anyway, take it away. What do you guys think?
I'm just thinking about the you know, until we know why he is funny, we can't understand why we're serious. And I was thinking about that. Somebody said something that made me think something else, but I can't remember what it was. But I guess something a thought that keeps reoccurring when we're talking about this was, it's actually a Heinlein quote from Stranger in a Strange Land, where the character figures out that all humor is because something is wrong. Like that, I mean, it was just a really simple statement, and the more I've ever thought about that statement, the more real it becomes. It's like every time anything is ever funny, there's something wrong with it somehow. And I thought, okay, so it's like maybe both sides are somewhat funny. Like these serious people are so serious that it's humorous. I don't know. I don't have a full train of thought there. You know, it just occurred to me. But I mean that. I keep trying to apply that thought, and I think that there's something there, but I don't know that I.
No, that's really smart. I like that. They're so serious, they're funny, and he's so funny, he's serious. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I really think you're onto something. That is a big idea of what humor is. That it's laughing at the wrongness of something. That's what creates humor. And on that understanding, then to say we need to understand why Snuffles is funny is we need to understand why Snuffles is wrong.
Yeah,
but I'm not sure. You know,
right? I don't know. Right
there, but we're on the track here. You know, we're kind of like, okay, we're getting somewhere. I think I was a little surprised when I agree, and especially this time around more than ever. Each time I've read, I've sympathized or empathized with Snuffles more and more, and this time around the most of all. And initially in early reads, I thought he was quite petulant and petty about his, like, you know, why didn't you praise me? You know, but this time, especially around, I really started to feel it from, what if you were a godlike entity who had made something as awesome as a planet and these little pea brains come along, you know, and are just like, you know, and you like them, and they like you. You just want a little praise. There's a part where he says, look, everything wants praise, and they just like complain and kind of make fun. And you're just like, and his tone in my head became less petulant and more like a god saying, you just don't understand, like you can't even imagine what it's like to try to hold all this together in your head, and sure, I made mistakes, but, come on, could you even make mistakes like I make? You know what I mean? Like, and it just like became a little more profound in that way. But
Yeah,
again, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rich.
I think with what Chris was saying, that there's a very specific point about not labeling people or trying to put somebody into one category, that we're more complex than that, and that it's insulting to just say that is all you are. And that is what Snuffles felt too. That is all you are. If you believe in God, are you putting him in that kind of a box? This is all you are. How dare you, if you're my creation, do that? I think there's a profoundness here that is being hinted at.
I agree. And I've always thought that it's just hinted at through one of the weirdest and like grotesquest ways you could hint at such an idea, that it's always thrown me off in a good way. Like, I'm just like, whoa, that's a really weird way to put it. Like if this is like a Job-like moment, like in the book of Job, in the Hebrew Bible, where ultimately, finally, God shows up in a theophany, in a whirlwind, and just gives these awesome speeches about nature and how awesome it is, and how there's these huge monsters called Leviathan and Behemoth that you can't possibly understand, and you don't know anything about the cosmos, and like, almost as if, there's a lot there, people have been debating that book forever, but like almost as if to say, like, you wouldn't even understand it if I tried to explain it to you, type of an idea. But this is done in an explicitly carnival fashion. So imagine like the book of Job, but during a carnival. So instead of a whirlwind showing up with epic speeches, it's a giant bear creator going like, yeah, so I didn't understand. And then instead of going like, this is all so awesome, you couldn't understand, going like, yeah, so I got some things wrong. But like, do you get what I mean? Like, it's like a comedian version of the deity, saying like, look, you owe me some respect here as my creation, if that makes any sense. Which is, if you're going to do theology, man, it's a pretty fun way to do theology in fiction.
Sorry, I kind of hijacked that whole conversation.
Nah, It's all good.
But the only other thing I was going to add, which is really just an analogy, is that it's sort of like this planet is like a gallery, and Snuffles is like the artist, and then these people come in and look at the work, and they just start laughing at it, and they don't appreciate any of the effort that he's put into it. And for a while, he just kind of almost mocks them by doing their same thing. He makes his own protected zone. Like, you can't come into my zone, then, and it's like, you come in here and it's like, this is, come and enjoy it, but you're mocking it. And then finally he's just like, fine, that's it now. And he chases him around the gallery eventually.
Yes. He chases him around the gallery. That's so cool.
I like that concept. The artist that's just tired of people making fun of his art. It's great.
Like, I put a lot of work into this. Did you ever look at this? You know how hard this is to do?
So on that note, it actually is the case that Lafferty wrote somewhere, and I've seen the quote, but I haven't been able to trace where it's at. And I had once seen it in its source, so I know it's a real quote and it's from something, but I haven't been able to find it again. But I think everything we're talking about here with this story is going on, and it is intended to be what this story is about. But there's layers to it. And in addition to all these layers we've talked about, there is the artist and critics layer, and he explicitly says that it's a story about the revenge of an artist against his critics.
All right.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, and that's not the only time Lafferty will do that. And Lafferty has a number of authorial stand-ins in various characters in his stories that are pretty clearly aligned with who he is as a person. And I've come to think that Snuffles is actually one of those. His thinking computer, Epictistes, that's in a series of stories about the Institute for Impure Science, which includes stories like Thus We Frustrate Charlemagne, which is in 900 Grandmothers. Anyway, has a whole novel about that called Arrive at Easter Wine. And in that novel, Epictistes, the thinking computer, the AI, says that he submitted a bunch of science fiction stories to the Going magazines. And I think he even names some of them like Analog and stuff, and how they won't print his stuff and they say it doesn't work and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, that's because you guys are idiots and you don't understand how genius this is. And again, like every once in a while, I think Lafferty is just going like, yeah, people complain that I maybe don't get my science exactly right in one of my stories or something. And he's like, yeah, but did you see that I put a giant, like, man-eating bear with multicolored lightning? I mean, come on, this is awesome. Forgive me a few mistakes here. I think that's another layer to this story.
Definitely. That's wonderful.
I connected it to your playful myth making, which I think I talked about in my video. This feels like myth making.
Yeah.
A lot of his stuff does.
There's so much more we could say about Snuffles, let alone the other stories. And I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but I think it's a good first scratch.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for watching this very long discussion of these stories. It was inevitably going to be that way. They're too rich and juicy. So we will get on to the last story in the next video when we do Thieving Bear Planet, where things are, to me, going to get a little weirder even than things we've seen. I don't know what the other guys think. We'll find out, but it's a good one. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching. All right. Are you guys up for this? Are you okay?
Webbings torn, some black galactic fingers born. When will the star children star?
If we have a long one, so be it. Here's my dream. Someday there's going to be a greater amount of truly rabid Lafferty fans that are going to come across this content and be, oh, thank God, somebody's talking at great length about Lafferty. I'm so excited to dig into this. That's my hope.
Well, when I put in a search engine in YouTube, Lafferty, you're the guy who comes up.
And hey, something
world,
too.
If you won't do it, world, this is what you get. Okay.
That's right. That's right. This will show you. We'll show them. No, I think too, this is really great discussion. It's not, it's definitely not shallow discussion that we're getting to have, which is wonderful. So I think it's a sort of an evergreen type video, even if it's a little long. This conversation is really good. I'm learning things just listening to you guys. It's awesome.
Yeah, I agree, and I've noticed that again. I can't really say, it's for other people to say, but as I've tried to talk about Lafferty, I have felt like a lot of this bounce is really coming from his work because it's kind of encyclopedic. It seems to try to include like everything there is about existence, such that when you discuss it at length, the discussions just become quite rich. And I feel like you could like not even know Lafferty's stuff and like listen to people discuss him and be like, that was a really interesting conversation. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
I did that with myself in one of my videos.
Right.
Where I was like, I don't know if this really can be read deeply. And then I read it deeply, just trying to give an example. And then I was like, wow, okay, I get it.
I know. I talked about you doing that. I like imitated you going like, I don't think you could really, say it. I mean, it could be about this. And then, now that I say that, actually, I really like it. And it was a good one. It was a really good interpretation.
Some black galactic fingers born. Star